In the pre-dawn darkness of December 15th, 1941, 16-year-old Minji Song clutched her mother's trembling hands in their small home on the outskirts of Seoul as Japanese military police pounded on doors throughout their village. When they reached her family's dwelling, the soldiers presented official papers claiming she had been volunteered for factory work supporting the imperial war effort. The commanding officer's leather gloves creaked as he gripped Minji's thin wrist, dragging her from her weeping parents, as neighbors watched through cracked doors, fear preventing intervention. None of them understood that Minji would become one of the more than 200,000 women forced into sexual slavery across Japanese-occupied territories. Her body transformed into a battlefield, where between 15 and 40 men would inflict daily violence in makeshift military brothels. This is the story of how an ordinary schoolgirl became prisoner 831, how imperial policy weaponized women's bodies, and how survivors fought decades of institutional silence to reclaim their humanity. Subscribe now to discover how Minji's testimony finally shattered a 50-year conspiracy of denial. The winter of 1941 settled over Korean peninsula with unusual cruelty. Farmers spoke of omens, crows gathering in unprecedented numbers, unseasonable lightning splitting ancient trees, wells that ran suddenly dry. Those educated enough to dismiss superstition found their scientific certainty faltering as the occupation intensified. 8 years under Japanese imperial control had transformed daily indignities into systematic erasure. Korean language was forbidden in schools. Historical records were confiscated and burned. Family names were forcibly changed to Japanese equivalents. Yet these public humiliations paled beside the rumors that traveled in whispers between villages, young women disappearing from coastal communities, recruiting posters promising factory jobs that somehow required only teenage girls, military trucks arriving at night and departing before dawn. Minji Song lived with her parents and younger brother in a modest home outside Seoul. At 16, she possessed the academic aptitude her teachers praised as exceptional. Despite restrictions on Korean students, she had mastered Japanese language requirements and maintained hopes of becoming a teacher herself. Her father, once a respected calligrapher whose art had decorated government buildings, now worked as a day laborer, his cultural profession deemed unnecessary by occupation authorities. Her mother supplemented their income by sewing military uniforms in a converted warehouse that once produced traditional Korean hanboks. The family endured, as millions did, by bending without breaking, by preserving private dignity while meeting public demands for compliance. On that December morning, Minji had risen early to help her mother prepare breakfast. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor 8 days earlier had intensified military presence throughout Korea. Checkpoints multiplied, curfews tightened, food rations decreased. Minji's father whispered that America's entry into the war might eventually liberate Korea, but such hopes remained dangerous to express. As Minji rolled rice into neat portions, pounding footsteps echoed through their neighborhood. Military police moved methodically from house to house, checking documentation and interrogating residents. When they reached the Song home, 3 officers entered without removing their boots, a deliberate disrespect that made her father flinch. "Minji Song," the ranking officer announced, consulting a paper. "You will come with us for labor assignment. Imperial decree requires all able young women to support war production. Pack 1 bag." Her mother stepped forward. "Sir, she's our only daughter. She attends school. She—" The officer's hand rose, silencing further protest. "This is not a request. The emperor requires sacrifice from all subjects. You should be honored by her selection." Minji's father, attempting to maintain dignity, asked, "May we know where she's going? For how long? Will we receive her wages?" The questions earned him a sharp blow across the face from the officer's gloved hand. Minji watched blood trickle from her father's mouth as he struggled to maintain composure. Her mother began weeping silently. "You have 10 minutes, the officer said, turning to Minji. "Pack warm clothing. Nothing else is required." As Minji hastily gathered her few possessions, her mother pressed a small jade pendant into her palm. "Keep this hidden," she whispered. "Remember who you are. Find a way to let us know where they take you." Outside, 6 other girls from neighboring homes were already loaded into a canvas-covered truck, their faces reflecting the same stunned confusion Minji felt. Some sobbed quietly. Others maintained the frozen composure of profound shock. Their families gathered at a distance, held back by bayonet-wielding soldiers who seemed to anticipate resistance. Minji recognized her school friend Sujin among the captured girls. Their eyes met in momentary recognition before both lowered their gaze, an instinctive response to their new reality. The truck journey lasted 2 days. The girls were fed minimal rations and permitted bathroom breaks only under armed supervision. They crossed into Manchuria, the Japanese puppet state established in northeastern China. When they asked about factory assignments, guards ignored their questions or responded with casual cruelty, slaps, pinches, lewd suggestions that hinted at a future too terrible to comprehend. Their destination was a former elementary school in a remote area outside Harbin. The building had been hastily converted for new purposes. Classrooms were divided into small cubicles using bamboo and cloth partitions. Windows were covered with wooden boards and barbed wire. The central courtyard was surrounded by a wooden fence topped with broken glass. As Minji and the others were marched inside, they encountered approximately 40 other Korean women already there, their expressions communicating warnings the new arrivals couldn't yet comprehend. A Japanese military doctor awaited them, seated at a desk with medical instruments and documentation spread before him. Each girl was forced to undress completely for health inspection. When Minji hesitated, guards tore her clothes away while others held her arms. The doctor examined her with clinical detachment, noting observations on a form. He measured her hips, waist, and breasts. He checked her teeth like a horse trader. He recorded her weight, approximately 100 pounds. Finally, he instructed a female assistant to draw blood and administer injections. "This one is healthy," he announced to a waiting officer. "Class A assignment." Minji would later learn this classification determined which soldiers would have access to her. Class A meant officers only, a designation that would not protect her from violence, but would limit the volume of daily assaults compared to girls assigned to enlisted quarters. That evening, the camp administrator, a civilian contractor named Tanaka, addressed the assembled women. His precise Japanese required no translation for Minji, though an interpreter repeated his words in Korean for those with limited language skills. "You have been brought here to serve the Imperial Japanese Army as comfort women," Tanaka explained, using the euphemism that would forever haunt survivors. "You will provide comfort to our brave soldiers who fight for the Emperor. You will be given Japanese names, you will be fed and housed, you will receive medical treatment. In exchange, you will obey every order without question." A girl near Minji began screaming. Guards dragged her away. The sounds of beating echoed from an adjacent room before falling silent. "Resistance earns punishment," Tanaka continued without acknowledging the interruption. "Obedience earns privileges. After the war, those who serve well may receive compensation. Those who cause trouble will not survive to see their homes again. You no longer belong to your families. You belong to the Empire." Minji was assigned the Japanese name Hanako and the identification number 831. Her cubicle contained a thin mattress on a wooden platform, a small table with a basin and pitcher and a hook for hanging clothes. The partition walls meant conversations could be heard, but speakers remained unseen. That first night, the weeping from adjacent cubicles prevented sleep. Veteran comfort women offered whispered advice through the darkness. Detach your mind from your body. Find a place inside yourself they cannot reach. I do not resist physically, it only makes them more violent. Save your strength for survival, not defiance. The next morning, Minji and the other new arrivals received their uniforms, simple cotton kimonos, and underwent mandatory instruction on procedures. A middle-aged Korean woman named Mrs. Park, herself a former comfort woman now working as an administrator, delivered these instructions with the emotional flatness of someone who had abandoned hope. "You will wash thoroughly between each soldier. You will use the prophylactic solution provided. You will report any injuries immediately. You will not speak Korean to the soldiers. You will smile and appear welcoming. You will not mention your real name or family. You will not attempt to keep track of time. Days, weeks, months are no longer your concern." That afternoon, Minji's assigned duties began. The first soldier who entered her cubicle was a lieutenant in his 30s. His visit lasted less than 10 minutes. He spoke no words to her beyond functional commands. When he finished, he straightened his uniform methodically and exited without making eye contact. Minutes later, another officer entered, then another. By evening, Minji had endured 12 men. Her body bled. Her mind retreated into a protective numbness that would become her only refuge. Days blurred together. The comfort station operated on military schedule, officers from 700 hours until noon, then a brief lunch period, followed by senior enlisted men until evening. Weekends brought longer hours and increased brutality as alcohol flowed freely. Minji learned to measure time, not by clocks or calendars, but by the rotation of soldiers, the changing of guards, the delivery of meals. Her world contracted to the dimensions of her cubicle. The jade pendant from her mother remained hidden beneath a loose floorboard, touched only in rare moments of privacy as a talisman connecting her to a former life. Within weeks, Minji's body bore the marks of captivity, bruises from rough handling, weight loss from inadequate nutrition, the perpetual fatigue of forced insomnia as soldiers visited throughout night shifts. Most devastating were the psychological transformations. Her retreating voice, speaking only when required, her averted eyes, avoiding direct contact, her diminished sense of self, responding automatically to Hanako as her Korean identity faded, like a photograph exposed too long to harsh light. Yet even in these brutal circumstances, human connections formed among the women. Their shared suffering created bonds that transcended previous differences of education, region, or social status. They developed subtle systems of mutual support, Extra food portions, smuggled to those punished with rations reduction, whispered encouragements through partition walls, silent signals warning of particularly violent soldiers. Mrs. Park, despite her administrative role, sometimes provided secretly gathered herbs to treat infections when official medical attention was withheld. Su Jin, Minji's friend from home, occupied a cubicle in the enlisted section. Their paths rarely crossed, but during occasional joint meal periods, they exchanged brief, meaningful glances. 3 months after their arrival, Su Jin managed to whisper to Minji during a bathroom break. "I am keeping count," Su Jin murmured. "Every day, every man. When this ends, someone must know what happened here. We must not let them erase this." The following week, Su Jin disappeared. When Minji cautiously inquired, Mrs. Park pulled her into a supply closet. "Never ask about those who vanish," she hissed. "Your friend tried to escape. She was caught. She became an example." "Is she dead?" Minji asked, her voice barely audible. Mrs. Park's expression conveyed the answer before her words confirmed it. "They gathered all the women in the enlisted section to watch. Remember that before you consider the same path." As 1942 progressed, military fortunes shifted. More soldiers rotated through the comfort station, their frustrations at battlefield setbacks manifesting in increased violence toward the captive women. Medical inspections became more frequent but less thorough, focused exclusively on preventing venereal disease transmission to soldiers rather than treating the women's injuries. Those who became pregnant endured forced abortions, performed with minimal anesthesia. Those who contracted diseases received just enough treatment to keep them functional. Minji witnessed 2 suicide attempts among newer arrivals. Both were thwarted by guards. The women received severe punishments before being returned to service. The message was clear: even their deaths belonged to the Empire. The comfort station's doctor, a man named Matsumoto, maintained detailed records on each woman. Minji caught glimpses of these documents during her weekly examinations. Notations tracked her weight, menstrual cycles, infection history, and utilization statistics. The clinical reduction of her humanity to data points represented a different kind of violation. The bureaucratization of atrocity that would later allow perpetrators to distance themselves from personal responsibility. During one examination, Dr. Matsumoto seemed troubled by Minji's deteriorating physical condition. He prescribed additional food rations and 2 days of rest, a rare acknowledgement of human limitations in a system designed to ignore them. As he wrote his recommendations, Minji noticed photographs on his desk: a woman, presumably his wife, and 2 young daughters. The normality of this family portrait, juxtaposed against her circumstances, crystallized the compartmentalization that enabled such systems to function. "You have daughters," Minji said quietly in Japanese. The doctor glanced up, momentarily startled by this departure from the expected silent compliance. "How old are they?" she continued, gesturing toward the photograph. 13 and 15, he answered automatically before his professional detachment reasserted itself. He turned the frame face down. "That is not your concern. Return to your quarters." Whether her observation affected him remained unclear, but the following week, Minji received an unexpected assignment as administrative assistant to Mrs. Park, filing medical records and supply inventories. The work provided occasional respite from her primary duties and access to information about the station's operations. She learned that similar facilities existed throughout Japanese-occupied territories: China, the Philippines, Indonesia, Taiwan, and Pacific Islands. She discovered that Korean women constituted the largest percentage of comfort women, though the system enslaved women of every territory under imperial control. This administrative role allowed Minji to document what happened at the comfort station. Using scraps of paper and stolen pencil stubs, she maintained hidden records: names of women, origins, significant events, particularly brutal officers, death counts. She concealed these notes beneath the floorboard with her jade pendant, building an archive that bore witness to what the Empire would later attempt to deny. In early 1943, an incident occurred that transformed Minji's understanding of the broader conflict. A high-ranking officer named Colonel Hiroshi Nakamura became a regular visitor to her cubicle. Unlike most soldiers who treated comfort women as objects, Nakamura engaged in one-sided conversations, needing a silent audience for his increasing doubts about Japan's military strategy. Perhaps Minji's understanding of Japanese made her valuable as a confidant, or perhaps her assigned Japanese identity allowed him to temporarily forget her Korean origin. The Americans advance in the Pacific, so he told her during one visit, studying reports rather than touching her. Our supply lines stretch too thin. The Chinese resistance grows stronger. Yet headquarters demands offensive operations without adequate resources. Minji maintained the blank expression expected of comfort women, but internally cataloged every strategic detail. Nakamura's indiscretions continued for months as military setbacks mounted. He revealed troop movements, equipment shortages, command disputes. information that would have been valuable to Allied forces had any means existed to communicate it. More significantly for Minji, these unintended briefings provided context for her captivity, connecting her personal horror to the larger machinery of imperial expansion. During one such session, Nakamura mentioned a Chinese photojournalist documenting war crimes against civilians. This man, Chang, gathers evidence against Japan for post-war tribunals, he said bitterly, as if other nations fight with clean hands. The concept of war crimes tribunals, of future accountability, planted a seed in Minji's consciousness. If such proceedings might examine battlefield atrocities and civilian massacres, perhaps they would also address the systematic exploitation of women like herself. Perhaps documentation might someday matter. This possibility transformed her secret record-keeping from personal defiance to historical testimony. In autumn 1943, a new group of women arrived at the station. Among them was a 26-year-old Chinese woman named Liu Wei, captured during Japanese operations near Shanghai. Unlike most comfort women, selected for youth and presumed virginity, Liu had been a university student before her capture, educated, politically aware, and connected to resistance networks. Despite the extreme risk, she managed to communicate this background to Minji during work assignments. "Before the war, I studied journalism," Liu whispered while they sorted supply inventories. "I knew people documenting Japanese atrocities. If we survive, we must tell everything. The world must know." "No one will believe us," Minji responded, the hopelessness of their situation overwhelming any prospect of future justice. "Then we must make them believe," Liu insisted. "Numbers, names, dates, locations, specific details that cannot be dismissed." Their cautious friendship developed around this shared purpose. When Liu contracted pneumonia after winter punishment that involved standing naked in the snow, Minji risked severe consequences to share her extra food rations and medicine stolen from the infirmary. When Liu recovered, she taught Minji techniques for mental resistance, meditation methods learned from Buddhist teachers, memory exercises to prevent identity dissolution, psychological frameworks for processing trauma without being consumed by it. "They control our bodies," Liu told her, "but we decide what happens in our minds." By early 1944, changing war conditions affected the comfort station. Air raid drills interrupted routines. Supply shortages reduced rations. Military police conducted frequent inspections, searching for evidence of resistance activities, confiscating any unauthorized possessions. During one such search, Minji's hidden documentation was nearly discovered. Only Mrs. Park's deliberate distraction, dropping and shattering medical supply bottles, diverted attention long enough for Minji to better conceal her papers. Afterward, Mrs. Park confronted Minji privately. "I know what you're doing," she said, her voice a harsh whisper. "It will get you killed." "Someone must remember," Minji replied. "Someone must tell the truth." Mrs. Park's weathered face revealed decades of suffering beneath its stern exterior. "I have seen hundreds of girls pass through these stations since 1937. The lucky ones die quickly. The rest become like me, surviving only by becoming part of the system that destroyed them." "Is that why you helped them?" Minji dared to ask. "To administer the system?" "I helped them by teaching how to survive," Mrs. Park snapped, then softened slightly. "And sometimes, yes, by looking the other way when small resistances occur." She pressed something into Minji's hand, a small bottle of ink. "Better than pencil," she said. "More permanent." Then she walked away, maintaining the plausible deniability that had kept her alive through 7 years of captivity. As Allied forces advanced across the Pacific and Chinese resistance intensified on the mainland, the comfort station's operations became increasingly desperate. Wounded soldiers, barely recovered from battlefield injuries, were sent to improve morale. Military police conducted loyalty interrogations, seeking to identify anyone with sympathies toward the enemies of Japan. 3 Korean comfort women were executed after a guard claimed to overhear them celebrating American victories. In this atmosphere of heightened paranoia, Minji and Liu developed a coded communication system to continue their documentation efforts. They repurposed Japanese military terminology as euphemisms to record specific abuses. They transferred information through laundry markings and food distribution patterns. They recruited 2 other women into their witness network, a Filipina named Maria and another Korean woman called Sun Hee. Their small resistance could not physically challenge their captors or alter their circumstances, but it preserved something equally crucial, the truth that imperial authorities sought to obscure. Each documented atrocity became an act of defiance against the intended erasure of their experiences. Each secretly recorded name honored a woman reduced to a number. Each hidden page established a historical record that military headquarters in Tokyo never imagined would survive. In June 1944, the comfort station received orders to relocate farther from advancing Allied forces. The women were loaded into covered trucks for a journey north toward Russian borders. The difficult 3-day trip caused 2 deaths among women already weakened by malnutrition and illness. Their bodies were abandoned alongside mountain roads without ceremony or identification. Minji memorized the locations, adding them to her mental record. The new facility occupied a former monastery, its stone walls an isolated location selected to prevent escapes. The women were processed through another dehumanizing inspection before reassignment to quarters virtually identical to those they had left. Different location, same systematic exploitation. The military's standardized approach to organizing sexual slavery revealed its institutional nature, contradicting later claims that comfort stations represented unauthorized actions by individual commanders. During this relocation, Minji nearly lost her hidden documentation. Guards conducted thorough searches of the limited possessions women were permitted to bring. Through elaborate distraction efforts coordinated with Liu, Maria, and Sun He, she managed to conceal her papers within the lining of a Japanese military jacket assigned to her for the journey north. The pages contained over 300 names, dates of arrival and departure or death, identities of particularly abusive officers, locations of multiple comfort stations described by new arrivals, and organizational details of the entire system. The new location brought harsher conditions as Japan's military situation deteriorated. Rations decreased further. Medical supplies became scarce. Officers increasingly discussed desperate defensive strategies rather than offensive operations. Colonel Nakamura, now stationed at regional headquarters, visited less frequently, but continued his strategic monologues during each appearance. Through his indiscretions, Minji learned of massive American bombing campaigns against the Japanese mainland, Soviet preparations for entering the war, and the collapse of Japanese positions across the Pacific. In late April 1945, a new officer arrived to take command of the comfort station. Captain Taniguchi had been transferred from Singapore after that city's fall to Allied forces. His reputation preceded him. Previous comfort women evacuated from Singapore spoke in terrified whispers of his sadistic punishments and personal participation in torture sessions. His first address to the assembled women confirmed these accounts. Japan faces temporary setbacks, he announced, pacing before the formation of exhausted women. Victory requires absolute discipline and sacrifice. Comfort women who fail to maintain proper attitudes will face consequences. Those who support the imperial cause will be rewarded when final victory is achieved. His implementation of discipline began immediately. Daily inspections included scrutiny of facial expressions. Any woman not projecting appropriate enthusiasm received reduced rations. Random interrogations sought to identify defeatist attitudes among both comfort women and guards. Physical punishments for minor infractions escalated from slaps to systematic beatings. Despite these dangers, Minji's documentation efforts continued. Captain Taniguchi's arrival actually provided new information as his drunken boasts revealed details about comfort stations in Singapore, Indonesia, and the Philippines. His personnel file, temporarily accessible during Minji's administrative work, contained transfer records referencing comfort station operations dating back to 1937, when the system began expanding after the Nanjing massacre. In July 1945, a critical opportunity emerged. The comfort station received news that important military visitors would conduct an inspection tour. Preparations included temporary improvements to living conditions, better food, clean bedding, fresh uniforms, intended to present a sanitized version of daily operations. Minji was assigned to help prepare statistical reports for the visiting officials, giving her unprecedented access to comprehensive documentation. Working late in the administrative office, she discovered personnel files for the entire comfort station system in Manchuria, 16 facilities housing over 800 women. The files included budget allocations, supply requisitions, transportation manifests, and medical reports, all bearing official military seals and signatures from multiple levels of command. This documentation conclusively linked comfort stations to Japanese military hierarchy rather than private contractors, establishing institutional responsibility for the system's operation. With tremendous risk, Minji copied key documents, working through the night while avoiding guard patrols. When the visiting delegation arrived the following day, their inspection tour reflected the theatrical nature of totalitarian systems, a carefully choreographed performance bearing little resemblance to daily reality. Selected comfort women, including Minji, were presented as voluntary workers receiving proper treatment. Administrative records displayed for inspection omitted brutality statistics and death counts. Among the visiting officials was a civilian wearing diplomatic credentials, a Swiss national serving as a neutral observer for Red Cross concerns regarding prisoner treatment. During a momentary distraction, Minji managed to slip a folded paper into the man's coat pocket, a note written in careful English explaining what the comfort stations actually were and that women were held against their will. Whether he discovered this message or acted upon it remained unknown, but the mere possibility of outside communication sustained Minji's determination. In early August 1945, the comfort station routine suddenly disrupted. Military personnel engaged in frantic document destruction. Radio communications operated continuously. Officers gathered for emergency meetings. Rumors circulated among guards about revolutionary new American weapons deployed against Japanese cities. The number of visiting soldiers decreased dramatically as units received redeployment orders. On August 15th, everything changed. Emperor Hirohito's surrender announcement reached even this remote outpost. The recording, barely audible through static on military radio, used formal language and indirect phrasing that confused many listeners. But its implications became clear as Japanese officers responded with disbelief, rage, or in some cases, ritual suicide. The comfort women received no immediate announcement. They noticed changes through observation, guards appearing disoriented, military routines disrupted, supply deliveries halted. Captain Taniguchi assembled his officers for private meetings, while comfort women remained confined to quarters without explanation. Through Liu's connection with a Korean worker in the kitchen, they learned fragments of the situation. Japan had surrendered unconditionally. The war was over. What should have represented liberation instead introduced new uncertainties. No provisions existed for comfort women following Japanese defeat. No Allied plans addressed their evacuation or repatriation. Military documentation classified them as military supplies rather than prisoners or civilians, creating an administrative vacuum regarding their status. Most critically, as evidence of war crimes, many women feared Japanese authorities might eliminate witnesses before Allied forces arrived. This fear materialized on August 17th, when Captain Taniguchi ordered a massive document destruction operation. Administrative buildings burned through the night as military personnel destroyed evidence of comfort station operations. The following morning, comfort women were assembled for an unexpected announcement. Japan has agreed to temporary cessation of hostilities, Taniguchi stated, avoiding the word surrender. This facility will be evacuated. All personnel will relocate to designated assembly areas. No mention of the women's fate accompanied these instructions. When one woman dared ask about their transportation home, Taniguchi's response chilled everyone present. Arrangements for comfort women are being finalized, he said with ominous ambiguity. That evening, Minji overheard guards discussing orders to execute all comfort women before retreating, eliminating witnesses while blaming deaths on advancing Soviet forces. She immediately activated the communication network built with Liu, Maria, and Sun Hee. By midnight, all women in the facility had been quietly informed of the imminent threat. Their options were desperate: remain and face certain death, or attempt escape into war-torn Manchuria without supplies, documentation, or protection. Minji proposed a third alternative: seize the moment of maximum confusion during evacuation preparations to overpower key guards and secure weapons. The plan relied on precise timing and widespread participation, requiring women to overcome years of conditioned compliance. Liu coordinated communications, assigning specific responsibilities based on women's locations and physical capabilities. Mrs. Park, recognizing the legitimacy of the execution threat, provided critical information about guard rotations and weapons storage. The opportunity came at dawn on August 18th. As military personnel concentrated on packing equipment and destroying remaining documents, the women implemented their plan. Mrs. Park created a diversion in the administrative building by starting a controlled fire in the records room. When guards responded, women stationed in the kitchen seized knives and improvised weapons. Minji and Liu led a group that secured the unattended armory where pistols were stored. What followed was not the organized rebellion of trained resistance fighters, but the desperate struggle of traumatized survivors. Some women, too physically weakened or psychologically damaged to participate, remained in their quarters. Others found courage in collective action that individual circumstances had previously suppressed. The diversionary fire spread beyond its intended area, creating additional chaos. Guards responding to multiple emergencies found themselves isolated and overwhelmed by women acting in coordinated groups. Captain Taniguchi, attempting to restore order, confronted Minji and 7 other armed women in the main courtyard. His disbelief that comfort women would dare resist authority reflected the fundamental miscalculation of those who rely on dehumanization as a control mechanism. They forget that beneath the imposed numbness, humanity persists, waiting for opportunity to reassert itself. "Put down those weapons immediately," he commanded, reaching for his sidearm. Minji shot him before he could complete the motion. Her hands, steady from years of containing rage, delivered justice that formal tribunals would likely have denied. In the ensuing confusion, approximately 200 women escaped the comfort station, fleeing in multiple directions. Japanese military personnel, more concerned with their own evacuation than pursuing escapees, conducted perfunctory searches before abandoning the facility entirely. The escaping women faced tremendous challenges: language barriers in Chinese territory, physical debilitation from years of abuse, absence of identification documents, ongoing military conflicts between Soviet, Chinese, and remaining Japanese forces. They traveled in groups for protection, avoiding main roads, relying on guidance from Chinese women among them who recognized regional geography. They survived through mutual support, sharing limited resources, carrying those too weak to walk independently, keeping constant watch for threats. Minji led 27 women, including Liu, Maria, and 5 other Koreans. She carried her hidden documentation, now supplemented with copied military records and lists of officers involved in comfort station operations. The group traveled south, hoping to reach areas already under Chinese control rather than risk capture by Soviet forces advancing from the north. Their journey became a terrible odyssey through a war-devastated countryside. Bombed villages, abandoned military positions, fields left unharvested, bridges destroyed by retreating armies. After 3 weeks of difficult travel, during which 4 women died from illness and exposure, Minji's group encountered Chinese communist forces near Changchun. Their reception mixed suspicion with sympathy, as military officials attempted to determine their identities and origins. Liu's education and language skills proved crucial in establishing communication. She explained their status as former comfort women, detailing Japanese military involvement in their captivity, and presenting Minji's documentation as evidence. The Chinese commander, a woman named Zhang, who had fought Japanese forces since 1937, reviewed their documentation with grim recognition. She had encountered similar cases throughout the war, witnessing the aftermath of comfort stations in liberated territories. "Your evidence will matter," she told Minji through Liu's translation. "When international tribunals begin, they must address all Japanese crimes, not just those against Allied powers." Commander Zhang arranged transportation to a recovery center established for war victims in southern Manchuria. There, former comfort women received their first genuine medical treatment in years, addressing malnutrition, untreated injuries, reproductive damage from repeated sexual trauma, and infectious diseases. Physical recovery progressed faster than psychological healing. Many women experienced nightmares, dissociative episodes, panic responses to male presence, and suicidal ideation. These symptoms, later recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, received little formal treatment in 1945, though compassionate care providers developed supportive interventions based on experience with combat veterans. At the recovery center, Minji reconnected with Mrs. Park, who had survived the escape and made her way south with another group. Their relationship transformed outside the comfort station environment, from administrator and prisoner to fellow survivors navigating aftermath together. Mrs. Park's decades of experience provided perspective that helped younger women process their experiences. "Our survival is victory," she told them during group discussions. "Each woman who lives to tell the truth defeats their attempt to erase us from history." In October 1945, international authorities established repatriation programs for displaced persons throughout formerly Japanese-occupied territories. Minji and 5 other Korean women from her group registered for return transport to Seoul. Liu chose to remain in China, joining Commander Zhang's administrative staff to document war crimes for upcoming tribunals. Maria connected with American forces in the Philippines to arrange her return home. Before separating, these women who had shared unspeakable experiences copied Minji's documentation, creating multiple records to ensure survival of their collective testimony. "We may never meet again," Liu told Minji as they parted, "but our truth will endure beyond us. What was done cannot remain hidden forever." Minji returned to Korea in November 1945 to find her homeland transformed. Japanese occupation had ended, replaced by American military government in the south and Soviet control in the north. Her family home outside Seoul had been destroyed in bombing raids. Neighbors reported that her father had been arrested in 1943 for suspected resistance activities and never returned. Her mother and brother had relocated to a rural village in the south, where distant relatives provided shelter. The reunion with her family brought mixed emotions. Joy at survival collided with grief over their father's disappearance. Relief at returning home competed with shame many comfort women experienced, having internalized the stigma associated with sexual violation despite its involuntary nature. Her mother embraced her without question or judgment, but neighbors whispered, creating an environment where full disclosure seemed impossible. "I worked in a factory," Minji explained when asked about her years away. The partial truth became her public narrative, while the complete reality remained private, shared only with her mother during late-night conversations when her brother was asleep. "What they did was not your fault," her mother insisted, holding Minji through sobs that finally broke through years of emotional suppression. "You survived. You returned. Nothing else matters to me." But other things mattered to Minji: accountability, acknowledgement, prevention of similar atrocities in future conflicts. She maintained contact with Commander Zhang through carefully coded letters following developments regarding war crimes tribunals. The International Military Tribunal for the Far East began in May 1946, addressing Japanese aggression and atrocities. Minji provided written testimony through Chinese intermediaries, submitting copies of her documentation while protecting her identity. To her profound disappointment, comfort women received minimal attention during tribunal proceedings. Allied prosecutors focused on conventional war crimes, prisoner abuse, civilian massacres, biological warfare, while systematic sexual enslavement remained peripheral. American occupation authorities in Japan, concerned with political stability during Reconstruction, permitted selective prosecution that protected many responsible officials, including Emperor Hirohito. The comfort women system, involving hundreds of thousands of victims across multiple territories, received only passing reference in final judgments. This institutional neglect reinforced the silence many survivors maintained after returning to their communities. Social stigma surrounding sexual violence, cultural emphasis on family honor, and practical concerns about marriage prospects led many former comfort women to conceal their experiences. Some married without revealing their past to husbands. Others remained single, unable to navigate intimate relationships after profound trauma. Many suffered ongoing physical consequences: infertility from untreated infections, chronic pain from injuries, premature aging from malnutrition and stress. Minji herself struggled with these challenges. She completed education interrupted by her abduction, eventually becoming a teacher as she had once hoped. She never married, establishing instead a small independent household where she lived with her mother after her brother's marriage. She maintained her documentation, supplementing it with newspaper clippings about war crimes trials, occupation policies, and eventual Korean independence. She corresponded carefully with other survivors, building a hidden network of witnesses waiting for the world to be ready for their testimony. That moment did not come quickly. The Korean War erupted in 1950, creating new traumas that overshadowed historical accounting. Cold War politics prioritized Japan as a strategic ally against communism, discouraging American authorities from pursuing uncomfortable histories. Economic reconstruction dominated national priorities in both Japan and Korea. Most critically, shame and stigma continued silencing survivors more effectively than any official policy. Decades passed. Minji established a small library at her school, secretly including materials about war crimes and human rights. She documented survivor stories anonymously, presenting them as historical fiction to avoid censorship during periods of Korean political repression. She gathered medical records, establishing patterns of physical damage consistent with sexual slavery, creating evidence that future researchers might someday recognize. When survivors died, often prematurely from physical and psychological consequences of their captivity, she recorded their names and experiences in her growing archive. In 1970, Mrs. Park died in Seoul, having lived to witness Korean development following war devastation. Before her death, she entrusted Minji with her own documentation, administrative records she had secretly preserved during 7 years managing comfort stations. These papers included handwritten lists of women processed through facilities she oversaw, medical reports specifying treatment for captivity-related injuries, and supply requisitions quantifying the systematic nature of operations. Her final request was for Minji to ensure these records eventually reached appropriate authorities. "Not yet," Mrs. Park cautioned. "The world is not ready to hear our voices, but someday it will be. Be patient but persistent." Minji honored this request, consolidating Mrs. Park's documentation with her own growing archive. By the late 1970s, this collection included names and origins of over 600 comfort women, locations and operational details of 23 distinct comfort stations, medical records demonstrating systematic reproductive damage, military documents establishing institutional organization of the system, photographs secretly preserved showing comfort station facilities, personal testimonies from 42 survivors, correspondence tracking, post-war experiences and ongoing health consequences. This archive represented the most comprehensive documentation of comfort women experiences assembled by a survivor, yet remained largely unknown outside the network of women who contributed to it. Official histories in both Japan and Korea omitted the issue entirely. Academic research addressed Japanese wartime atrocities without examining gender-based violence. Military histories discussed strategic operations while ignoring systems supporting them. The silence surrounding comfort women seemed permanent and impenetrable. Then, in 1991, everything changed. Kim Hak-sun, a former comfort woman, broke the silence by publicly testifying about her experiences. Her courage inspired others. Throughout 1992, survivors began speaking publicly despite continuing stigma. Minji, then 67 years old, contacted these emerging voices, offering her documented evidence to support their testimonies. The Japanese government's initial denials, claiming comfort, women volunteered or were recruited by private contractors without military involvement, collapsed when confronted with survivor testimony supported by Minji's and others' documentation. Military records bearing official seals, transfer orders signed by commanding officers, medical reports from Army doctors, and budget allocations from war ministries established institutional responsibility beyond reasonable denial. When Japanese officials questioned document authenticity, Minji revealed the ultimate evidence, the names and service records of officers who operated the system, including many who achieved prominent post-war positions in government and business. This information, impossible to fabricate, yet verifiable through military archives, forced acknowledgement that systematic sexual slavery had been official policy rather than incidental misconduct. In August 1993, Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yohei Kono issued a statement acknowledging military involvement in comfort station establishment and management. This statement, while carefully worded to limit legal liability, represented the first official recognition of events survivors had testified about for decades. The Kono statement admitted that comfort stations were established in response to the request of military authorities, and that women were recruited against their will through coercion and coaxing. For Minji and other survivors, this acknowledgement brought validation but not closure. The statement stopped short of full apology or compensation. Subsequent Japanese administrations attempted to revise or reinterpret its admissions. Conservative politicians questioned survivor accounts despite overwhelming evidence. Educational materials minimized comfort women experiences or presented them as voluntary prostitution rather than systematic enslavement. This continued resistance to full accountability inspired Minji's final public act. In December 1996, at age 71, she joined weekly demonstrations outside the Japanese embassy in Seoul. These protests, initiated in January 1992, demanded comprehensive apology, individual compensation for survivors, historical education about comfort women, and prosecution of responsible officials still living. Each Wednesday, regardless of weather, survivors and supporters gathered before a simple bronze statue of a seated girl representing comfort women, their persistence a testament to the endurance of historical memory against institutional forgetting. Minji participated in these demonstrations for 8 years until her health declined. During this period, she transferred her complete documentation to academic researchers, establishing formal archives of comfort women testimony. She recorded video testimony for educational purposes. She met with international human rights organizations, documenting sexual violence in contemporary conflicts, establishing historical continuity between past atrocities and ongoing abuses. Most significantly, she corresponded with women in Bosnia, Rwanda, and other regions where sexual violence was deployed as a weapon of war. She shared survival strategies, documentation methods, and approaches to post-traumatic recovery. Her final writing project involved guidelines for gathering evidence of gender-based violence in conflict zones, creating a methodology that transformed individual suffering into documented history resistant to official denial. Minji Song died on August 15, 2005, the 60th anniversary of Japan's surrender. She was 80 years old, having outlived most comfort women from her generation. Her final request was for her jade pendant, preserved through captivity, escape, and decades of advocacy, to be displayed alongside the statue outside the Japanese embassy, a physical connection between memorial representation and lived experience. Her documentation archive continues informing historical research, legal proceedings, and educational materials about comfort women. The weekly demonstrations she joined continue today, having become the world's longest-sustained protest for human rights accountability. The bronze statue has been replicated in multiple countries, becoming an international symbol for confronting wartime sexual violence and opposing historical amnesia. The Japanese government's position has evolved through political administrations, sometimes approaching meaningful accountability, other times retreating toward denial. The Asian Women's Fund, established in 1995, provided payments to some survivors, but remained controversial for relying on private donations rather than official compensation. Various prime ministers have issued apologies of varying specificity, though questions about sincerity and permanence persist when subsequent officials contradict or minimize these statements. International recognition has expanded through United Nations resolutions, academic conferences, museum exhibits, and inclusion in historical education. Human rights frameworks developed partly through comfort, women advocacy now address sexual violence in contemporary conflicts. Documentation methodologies pioneered by survivors like Minji inform current evidence gathering in war zones. Yet full resolution remains elusive. Most comfort women, including Minji, died without receiving individual compensation or witnessing comprehensive Japanese accountability. Historical revisionism continues challenging established evidence. Diplomatic relations between Japan and former occupied territories remain complicated by unresolved historical grievances. The fundamental human capacity for denial when confronting uncomfortable truths continues influencing institutional responses. What endures is the testimony. Hundreds of women who overcame shame, trauma, and institutional resistance to document experiences power structures sought to erase. Their collective voice transformed personal suffering into historical record, individual trauma into legal evidence, private pain into public testimony. Through this transformation, they established that acknowledging past atrocities represents not historical burden, but prerequisite for genuine reconciliation. Minji's documentation, preserved against tremendous odds, contains a handwritten reflection she added in 1993 after first public acknowledgement of comfort women experiences. They took our bodies, our youth, our fertility, our families, our dignity, our voices. For 50 years, they took our history, but they could not take our truth. Memory persisted when everything else was lost. Documentation survived when lives did not. Words remained when those who spoke them departed. This is victory of a kind they never anticipated, that women declared subhuman would ultimately defend their humanity by transforming unspeakable experience into undeniable testimony. What was done cannot be undone, but what was hidden has been revealed. That revelation itself represents a form of justice when full accountability remains beyond reach. This understanding that bearing witness constitutes both resistance and reconciliation represents Minji Song's most enduring legacy. Her transformation from a 16-year-old abduction victim to historical documenter to international advocate demonstrates how systematic atrocity can be confronted through systematic memory. Her life embodied the progression from suffering to survival to testimony to activism, a path that countless survivors of gender-based violence continue following today. The Comfort Women's system represented one of history's largest organized sexual enslavement operations, implemented across multiple territories, continuing through years of conflict, involving hundreds of thousands of victims, supported by military infrastructure and documented in official records. Its systematic nature revealed how gender-based violence functioned not as incidental misconduct, but as deliberate policy, dehumanizing women while weaponizing their bodies, mechanizing sexual assault through bureaucratic organization, transforming intimate violation into institutional procedure. Understanding this history remains essential not merely for addressing past injustice, but for recognizing how similar systems emerge in contemporary conflicts. The specific methodology changes across cultural contexts and technological eras, but the fundamental instrumentalization of women's bodies as territory to be conquered, resources to be exploited, or property to be destroyed persists wherever military operations occur without accountability mechanisms. Comfort. Women testimony established documentation frameworks for recognizing these patterns, transforming individual experiences too painful to articulate into collective evidence, too substantial to dismiss. Minji Song, Comfort Woman number 831, transformed dehumanizing designation into human testimony that transcended numbers. Her documentation, preserved through impossible circumstances, ensured historical accountability survived beyond both perpetrators and victims. Her advocacy established that trauma need not be the final word in even the most extreme human experiences. Her persistence demonstrated how truth, systematically documented, eventually overcomes systems designed to obscure it. This remains her memorial, not bronze statues or museum exhibits, but the understanding that bearing witness itself constitutes both resistance and remembrance. What the Japanese Imperial Army did to comfort women was worse than most historical accounts acknowledge. But what survivors like Minji accomplished through documentation and testimony was greater than their captors could have imagined. They transformed military designation into human testimony, ensuring that history would ultimately be written not by those who controlled power, but by those who endured its abuse while preserving evidence of its implementation. In this transformation lies both warning about human capacity for systematic atrocity and testimony to human resilience against institutional erasure, dual legacies that continue informing contemporary approaches to conflict-related sexual violence, historical accountability, and gender-based justice throughout the world today.